California's monopoly territory is home to 17 million people.
Families already struggle to pay their bills.
AGD was convicted of 91 felonies.
Really? I mean, what's next?
Greybeard Talks Solar. He is SolarWise.
Welcome to the channel. Greybeard Talks Solar. So glad that you're here. And today's show is going to be all about solar tax credits, the surprising truth about tax credits relative to the purchase of solar. So I think this is going to be a great show. If you have any confusion regarding how this works, my industry, the solar industry, typically does engender some confusion regarding tax credits, and we're going to attempt to eliminate that confusion during today's video. So thank you so much for joining. Please like, subscribe, and share if you find the content compelling and informative. We're always hoping to make you more solar wise. All right, so just jumping into it, in case you didn't know, as part of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022 that was signed into law by President Biden, the solar tax credit was set to expire, and this legislation, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, increased the solar tax credit to 30%. It was going to sunset in the next 2 years had they not done something. Now that tax credit is 30% of the cost of the solar system, and that tax credit currently in that legislation would stay at 30% through the year 2032. Now, the reason I'm doing this particular show is a lot of people in the solar industry talk about the tax credit as though it's a rebate. And it's definitely not a rebate. So the difference here is simple. If a product that you purchase is eligible for a rebate, what that basically means is everybody that purchases that particular product would then get a coupon or a rebate sent to them in the mail, usually a check or some sort of credit for that rebate. All purchasers are able to take advantage of that. Now, a tax credit is a very specific benefit. It really has to only do with tax liability. It's like having a coupon in your back pocket to allow you to pay a tax liability with this particular coupon. So the reason I make this distinction is, unlike a rebate, there are some instances and some circumstances where homeowners may not be able to benefit from a solar tax credit if they purchase a solar system. And that occurrence would be anybody that has really, really low income or virtually no tax liability. Now, first things first, before I go any further, I want to make sure you understand I've got a 22-year background as a fiduciary financial advisor, but I am not a tax professional. I am not a tax preparer. I'm not a tax attorney. So please consult with your own professionals to verify the information that I'm sharing today. But effectively, the difference here is simple. I'll take, for example, my mother's situation. Before she passed away, about 90% of her income came from Social Security. Now, if Social Security is the only source of your income or the primary source of majority of it, you have very little tax liability. And so often she would not have any tax liability at all on her earned income from Social Security. So as a result of that, if she doesn't have a tax liability, a tax credit is a coupon to pay taxes that she can't use. It's like having a coupon for a product that you would never buy or can't purchase. And so in that situation, it's important to understand the lower your income, the less your tax liability, the less benefit you may see from the income tax credit associated with solar. So let me go through some math to make sure everyone's on the same page, because there's some common misconceptions and confusion regarding how that credit works. I spoke with a homeowner just yesterday that was under the impression that if they didn't have a tax liability that they owed, in other words, this particular person was employed, working with a company, having withholdings taken out of his paycheck. And normally at the end of the year, he was in a situation where he'd get a tax refund because of his voluntary contributions through his payroll of taxes throughout the whole year. So he would normally get a refund. So he was under the impression because he didn't normally have a tax liability, he's normally in a refund situation, that the tax credit would not benefit him. And so I'm going to go through some scenarios here with you via math, and we'll see if I can't help to make sense of how this particularly works. But let's say, for example, that you're working and your employer deducts your tax liability out of your normal paycheck. And let's say that tax deducted for you in this particular example is $1,000 a month. So at the end of the year, you've got $12,000 through voluntary payroll withholdings that you have contributed toward your tax liability with Uncle Sam. And let's say you're contemplating purchasing a $30,000 solar system. So the tax credit on a $30,000 cash purchase solar system would be 30% of that cost. So in essence, 30% of 30 grand is 9,000. So effectively, if everything goes the way that you hope and expect, and a lot of the ways in which my industry leads you to believe it should, that $30,000 system would then come with a $9,000 tax credit benefit, making your particular net cost only $21,000 in that scenario. So back to my example. You've been withholding payroll taxes out of your normal paycheck throughout the year. You've put in $12,000 worth of contributions. And let's say you go to meet with your tax person, and effectively your tax person says, well, Jim, Sam, Fred, whoever you are, I've calculated your liability, and your liability with Uncle Sam is exactly $12,000. So you contributed $12,000. And your liability is $12,000, so you're not going to get a refund, but you also don't owe any tax liability. And you go, well, Mr. Tax Preparer, listen, I bought this solar system. Does this help me at all? I bought this $30,000 solar system, and it was installed in this current tax year. So point of clarification here, the tax credit is based not on when you contract with the installer to buy the system. It's based on when the system actually is installed and goes live, because not all contracts end up with installations. Not all people that decide to sign something end up installing that particular system. So it's based on the year, the calendar year, the tax year in which the system was installed. So back to my example. So your tax person says you've contributed $12,000 worth of tax liability or tax payments. Your liability is $12,000. You're not going to get a refund, but you also don't owe any money. And so you say, hey, listen, I bought this $30,000 system. How does this affect me? Well, the $9,000 tax credit that you have for purchasing the solar system would replace $9,000 worth of the withholding that you had contributed throughout the year. So this replaces this. And in essence, in that particular example, you would get a $9,000 tax refund back from the solar purchase, because the tax credit replaces your earned money or contributed money throughout the year, and you'd get that back. So let me give you another example. Let's assume that your withholdings were $1,000 a month, so $12,000 at the end of the year. And let's say the tax credit benefit, $30,000 solar system, so $9,000 tax credit. But let's say for whatever reason your tax liability in that year was greater than $12,000, it was $15,000, and you only contributed $12,000 through your withholdings. So now you're meeting with your tax person and saying, Mr. Tax Person, here's what I contributed, here's all my documents, and they come back and say, well, unfortunately, Jim, Sally, Fred, it looks like you're going to owe $3,000 because we underfunded for your tax account, and effectively your liability is $15,000 and you only put in $12,000. And you go, but hey, I bought a solar system. Does that help me? It's a $30,000 system, and I'm been told it's a $9,000 tax credit. And your tax person goes, absolutely, that helps you. So that $9,000, $3,000 of it would take care of the present liability. So effectively, it would make sure that you don't have to write a check for the excess taxes that are due. And the other $6,000 would replace $6,000 worth of your contributions throughout the year, and effectively you'd get a $6,000 refund. So in that example, you don't pay the $3,000, and you're going to get $6,000 back, effectively netting the $9,000 benefit. So let me give you a different example. Let's assume you voluntarily contributed throughout the year only $5,000 worth of tax liability. and tax contributions, and you meet with your accountant to do your taxes, and he basically says, well, you don't owe any money and you're not going to get a refund back. Your liability is $5,000. But you say, hey, listen, I bought this solar system and I'm understanding that it's a $9,000 tax credit benefit. Does that mean I get a $9,000 refund? Well, back to that example, if you've only contributed $5,000 and that was your liability, so you don't owe any money and you're not going to get a refund, effectively, the tax credit can replace the $5,000 of contribution, but you can't get any further benefit in that year for any of the excess. So in essence, you would get a $5,000 refund. $5,000 of the $9,000 tax credit would apply toward the tax liability. But here's the distinction I'm making. The IRS will not allow you to get back more money than what your total liability was. And this is the mistake that some people make in solar by calling it a rebate. It makes people believe, it makes homeowners believe that effectively anytime you purchase it, you're guaranteed to have that benefit. That's not true. If you don't have a tax liability, you can't harvest the benefit of a tax credit. You need to have a liability. Whether you've contributed or not, you have to have a liability with the IRS to be able to harvest that tax credit. Now, in a situation where you can't take full advantage of it in the present year, you can carry that forward. That tax credit benefit could then be applied to next year's taxes or the following year's taxes, up to about 20 years. If you have very little income and a very little liability, and let's say that $9,000 tax credit, you're only able to use $1,000 of it a year for whatever reason, then you could carry it forward into multiple years into the future, 8, 9 years into the future, to harvest all of the benefit of that particular tax credit. Now, another point of distinction, okay? The tax credit is based on the amount of the contract or the cost of the solar system as it's installed at your particular property. So if you pay cash for that system, it's the cash cost with your contract value with the installer. It's the cash cost, 30% applied toward that. But here's an interesting distinction. In the solar world, solar financing, if you wanted to purchase a system and then finance that particular system through a finance company, oftentimes there is monies that would be added onto the cost of that system to buy down that rate. Speak with your tax preparer, but if that cost, let's say it's a $30,000 cash system, but if you finance it, you've got to pay back via the loan $40,000, let's say. And that's the actual loan balance that they would obligate you to paying back because you're buying down the rate a bit. That extra $10,000 is going to buy down that rate. Well, now, potentially, you have the benefit of maybe harvesting 30% against $40,000 or $12,000 worth of tax credit benefit versus the 30% of the cash cost, which was $30,000. And so I know we're getting a little into the weeds here, but this is part of the discussion that we would have with you individually as a homeowner if you were working with our team. Now, another point of distinction, solar financing is very interesting and I think somewhat misleading to a lot of homeowners. So when you look at solar financing and you look at a 25, 20-year payment, whatever the situation is, whatever the term of time you've selected, let's say it's a 25-year loan. Most solar finance companies are going to want you to bring back the tax credit benefit that you receive from Uncle Sam, and they'll give you 18 months to do so. The idea behind the 18 months is that you should be able to encompass a full calendar tax year within an 18-month, contiguous time frame. So effectively, every 18 months, you're going to have a full tax year in there where you would benefit from that particular tax credit. So effectively, they give you 18 months to go harvest the tax credit, and then they want you to bring it back. And they'll make a payment. The first payment that you see quoted for you is going to assume that you get the full benefit of that tax credit and that within 18 months you bring all of it back to then pay down the solar loan. If you do that, whatever payment you start out with, let's say it's $250. If you do that within that 18 months, then your payment starts at $250 and would stay at $250. But what if you have another purpose for that money? What if you want to spend it? What if you want to use it to bless your family? What if you want to use it for a vacation? What if you want to use the tax credit benefit to pay down some debt? In other words, let's say you have a different place you want to park that money. and you choose to park it elsewhere, or in this particular example, let's assume that you, because of your income, don't really have a tax liability and then can't harvest the benefit of the tax credit. In that situation, what happens is after that 18-month time elapse, your $250 payment, if you didn't bring back that tax credit, that $250 payment might become a $350 or $400 payment, because the finance company now is bearing a loan value that's greater than what they thought they were going to bear, because under the premise that you were going to bring it back, you would pay down that particular loan. So keep that in mind. That is not something that is explained well or often to a lot of folks in the finance world, okay? So when you finance solar through a solar company that does solar financing, keep in mind they'll give you two different payment scenarios. One assumes a lower payment, assuming that you're going to bring that tax credit back and use it to pay down the loan. Another one would assume potentially that you don't use any tax credit at all to pay down that loan, in which case your payment would then jump up. So there's only one point of reamortization in a solar loan. It's usually 16 to 18 months, depends on the finance company, but it's usually 16 to 18 months out that you would have that particular opportunity to potentially refinance that. Now, one last point here. If you're not eligible to take advantage of the income tax credit because your income is so low, that's where programs like power purchase programs can really be an advantage to you, because effectively they call these TPO systems, or third-party owned solar systems, meaning you don't own it, so you're not the one that would have gotten the tax credit anyway. The company that's sponsoring it, that's giving you the solar system, they'll provide you the solar system, provide you the batteries, as long as you agree to buy the power once the system goes live. So those folks get the benefit of the tax credit, and they definitely want it. That's part of the structure of what they need. They want that tax credit. Part of the way that these programs work is that they really are pooling together funds from investors to be able to buy into that tax credit benefit scenario. So those programs are really, really good for somebody that can't harvest the tax credit. Now, one last pro tip here, coming from a 22-year former fiduciary financial advisor. Now, if you have an old IRA, okay, qualified monies, and let's say your income presently is low enough that you don't really get the benefit, but you want to buy a system. You don't want to waste the tax credit. You don't want to forfeit that tax credit. In that type of a situation, maybe you've got highly appreciated stock that you can sell that would trigger a liability that you could use the tax credit against. Maybe you can take some money out of an IRA, over distribute for a particular year, because any money coming out of an IRA is income tax liable. You got this tax credit. You pull money out of the IRA, you can take the tax credit and use it to apply against the liability from making that distribution. Or the really ingenious or smart thing to potentially consider to do is, if you don't need the money, if you don't want to distribute it, maybe you do a Roth conversion, which means take pre-tax money, turn it into after-tax money via a Roth vehicle, a Roth conversion, and then use the tax credit from solar to mitigate or eliminate the liability from doing the conversion. So getting into the weeds here, but just a little bit of that old 22-year solar financial and knowledge applied to both industries for your benefit. So hopefully this was helpful to you in terms of understanding how the solar tax credit works. Thank you so much for watching Greybeard Talks Solar, where little wisdom goes a long way in turning sunshine into serious savings for you. Don't forget to smash the like, subscribe, and share buttons. Stay charged, stay informed, and keep shining.
Thanks for listening to SolarWise, Greybeard Talks Solar. Please visit our website, solarwiseco.com, to learn more, and we will see you next time on SolarWise.